we have Queers for Palestine.
Yes, this is crazy.
Queers for Palestine is like chickens for KFC, right? Each of these parasitic ideas, what are they? Postmodernism, social constructivism, cultural relativism, identity politics, phobia, fear of using biology to explain human behavior, radical feminism. Each of these idea pathogens originally started with a noble cause, but then it metamorphosizes into complete lunacy in the service of some noble justice goal.
Welcome to a new and very exciting episode of Deep Dive today with Professor Gad Saad. Professor Saad, it's an honor having you on my show.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our chat.
Yeah, I'm looking forward as well. I want to introduce you to our audience. I think it's the first time you're on a German channel, aren't you?
I don't think so. I don't want to misspeak, but I think when The Parasitic Mind came out, I can't remember if it was an interview for a magazine or what the exact context was. It might have not been a show in the way that you organize your show, but there was some German platform, if I'm not mistaken. So perhaps first, perhaps second.
Okay, perhaps it's a premiere. I couldn't find anything, but anyhow, it's great having you. I'm looking forward to talking to you because I love your books and your opinions. So you're currently a professor of marketing at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. You were born in Lebanon, actually, and you made your Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Computer Science. And also you've got an MBA from McGill University and PhD from Cornell University. So very nice, very good, nice CV, I have to say. And you pioneered the use of evolutionary psychology in marketing and consumer behavior, and you've written many books, and we talked today about two of them. You already mentioned one, The Parasitic Mind, and of course your new one about happiness. So, and you also got a YouTube channel, and I will put all the links beneath if you want to read the books from Mr. Saad. You can find the links in the show notes, and your YouTube channel is called The Sad Truth, actually. Nice word game, I liked it. So, before we start, we had some developments in the last couple of days, weeks, which are really concerning in the Middle East. We talk about Israel, of course, and you're born in Lebanon, in Beirut, beautiful city actually, and you're also Jewish. So what's your take on the situation right now in the Middle East, in Israel and Gaza?
I guess if I take the 30,000 view of this, it's really disheartening because we escaped when I was 11 years old, Lebanon, precisely because of the difficulty of being Jewish in the Middle East. And then for many years in the West, I thought that I had left this craziness behind me, but apparently it never leaves you. It just takes certain demographic realities to change, and then the same kind of dynamics happen again. So I'm very disheartened. I think that this might be one of those intractable problems that could never be solved. I'm optimistic and a happy person by nature, hence this is why I wrote the happiness book. But when I see the kind of responses, the kind of vitriol, the kind of hatred that I'm seeing on social media in general, and some of it directed at me, then I certainly worry about the prospects of peace in that region.
Yeah. You still got relatives in Lebanon or in Israel?
Well, I don't have in Lebanon because it would be a very bad idea to be Jewish in Lebanon. So I don't have. As a matter of fact, from the latest count, there's about 40 Jews in Lebanon, but who are not practicing as Jews. So for example, in the 1950s, someone might have married a Muslim person and now they live in Lebanon, but they're not a practicing open Jew. So there's the complete Jewish community has been eradicated in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt, in Yemen, in Libya, in Tunisia, in Algeria, and so on. There's only one place where you still have a few Jews, Morocco and perhaps in Iran, but in most places, Jews have magically disappeared. Now, in Israel, I do have a lot of family because my father comes from a family of 11 and my mother comes from a family of 7, most of whom moved to Israel from Lebanon at various points before the Civil War. And so I have tons of cousins. Even my paternal grandparents had moved to Israel in 1970. They've since passed away. So yes, I mean, there's probably not a city in Israel where I don't have some relatives.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think? You're an optimistic person. You wrote a book about happiness, but will there ever be peace in the Middle East? Do you see any kind of solution?
The only solution, which I'm not sure that it could ever take place, is one that changes people's hearts and minds. So this is not about a fight for land. That it is absolutely 100% not about that. It's about whether Jews can be viewed as equal human beings, because as I said earlier, they seem to have disappeared from every place in the region. There's only one place where they still remain, and apparently it's too much. So about 99.6%, if I'm not mistaken, of the land surrounding Israel is occupied by Arabs, and there is 0.4% that is left for the Jewish people. And then the question is, do Jews have a right to have self-autonomy? If the answer to that is yes, and if people can accept it, then I think there can be peace. If the answer to that is no, then there could never be peace. It's as simple as that.
You yourself, you experienced war in 1975 in Lebanon. So did come any thoughts up your mind when you switched on social media or the telly?
Yeah, I mean, listen, in chapter 1 of The Parasitic Mind, I go through in detail, and that's not even my entire story. It's just some of the more poignant moments. But I can fill up 10 books of, what happened when I was in Lebanon during the Civil War, because the brutality of any war is often measured against the backdrop of the Lebanese Civil War, because its brutality was simply astounding. Yeah, it's terrible. The reason why I describe it in The Parasitic Mind is because I wanted to explain to people what happens when you use tribal politics, when you use identity politics to organize a society. You get Lebanon, you get Rwanda, you get Iraq, you get Syria. So what made the West great is that it argued that no, you're first an individual, right? I am Gad Saad with all of my qualities and all of my faults. Part of my identity is I'm Lebanese. Part of my identity is I have green eyes. Part of my identity is I'm Jewish. But I present myself to the world as an individual agent, right? Whereas in Lebanon, everything was viewed and remains viewed through the prism of your religious heritage. As a matter of fact, I explain in The Parasitic Mind that there is an internal card, ID card, that you carry, like akin to a passport, but inside the country, where the primary thing that's written there is not your height or your weight or your, it's what your religion is. And the Jews weren't even called Jews, even though we're fully Lebanese. We had nothing to do with Israel. We're Arabic speaking. We were called Israeli, which basically means Israelite. Israeli. And so you might imagine how there weren't going to be many roadblocks that you were going to come out of alive if you were going to be stopped and somebody said, show me your papers, and it says Israeli. There's going to be a bullet in your head very quickly. And so this is what we're seeing here is something that I lived through in my childhood. And as I said, it will never, ever go away until one group recognizes that the other group has a right to exist as equal human beings.
Yeah. I've got a feeling that we are witnessing actually a paradigm shift because I think it will escalate. I hope I'm wrong, of course, but do you fear the same escalation that, for example, if Iran joins or the US reacts or something like this happens, that it could escalate pretty quickly in the Middle East?
I mean, of course, it can, within 1 nanosecond, things can go crazy. This is why it may not be a good idea to offer the trajectory for Iran to have access to nuclear weaponry. Because again, the most dangerous thing on earth is not the weapons that we create, it's the ideas behind those weapons, right? In Nazi Germany, it's not the fact that the Nazis had sophisticated weapon is that there was a gentleman with a group of his good friends that had a certain view of the world, and then they affect policies that are consistent with that view. That's the danger. So to have an ideology as that, which is the defining ideology in Iran, and to say, well, France has nuclear weapons, the US has nuclear weapons, Britain has nuclear weapons. Why shouldn't the Iranians have nuclear weapons? The Israelis have nuclear weapons. Well, it might be because some of the driving ideologies behind the Iranian regime might not be consistent with values of liberty and peace. So yes, I think things can go badly very quickly, but hopefully let's both be optimistic that this can
Of
be
course.
just one small bleep.
Always, always. I always think positive. So talking about ideologies, let's talk about your book, actually, The Parasitic Mind. It got published 2 years ago, and you described a mind virus. Please describe the mind virus to our audience.
Right. So I often tell people, and I discuss this in chapter 1 of the book, that I faced 2 great wars in my life. The first great war we've already talked about. It was the Lebanese Civil War. The second great war is having been a professor now for 30 years and seen the war on reason, on logic, on science, on common sense, on reality. That's also a very, very nasty war. And so I first saw that when I was trying to Darwinize the business school. And so, as you briefly mentioned at the start of the intro, by the way, you missed 1 degree. There's also a Master's of Science from Cornell, but that's okay. That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it. I'm just saying it for completeness so that people, not that I need to share my CV, but so in my scientific work, what I have done for the past 3 decades is to try to incorporate evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology in studying human behavior in general and consumer behavior and economic behavior in particular. And so when I first was trying to do that, when I was trying to pioneer that, most of my social scientist colleagues and business school colleagues were, what are you talking about? How the biology doesn't matter for human beings. Biology is important for the mosquito. Biology is important for the zebra. It's important for the dog. But surely we are cultural beings. We transcend our biology. And so right there, I said, how could sophisticated intellectuals actually believe that biology applies to every species on Earth except one? Or usually, if they argued that biology matters, it mattered as long as biology stopped at the neck. In other words, it might explain why we have opposable thumbs. It might explain why your liver works the way that it does. But surely evolutionary psychology can't explain the human mind. Well, of course it can. How else did the human mind come to be? Through magic? So that's when I first started seeing the attacks on reason. So it was in my scientific pursuits. But then that problem proliferated like a really aggressive cancer, so that today we no longer know what's male, what's female. Until about 15 minutes ago, there had been 117 billion people who've lived on Earth, each of whom knew exactly what male or female was. But recently, the really smart progressive people at Harvard and Oberlin College have told us that we got it all wrong. Sometimes women could have penises. Sometimes men can have cervixes. So we have to rethink biology and the binary sexist nature of male and female. And so when I wrote The Parasitic Mind, I did it in the following way. I wanted to find a framework to try to explain how it could be that human minds can think so irrationally. And that's when I came up with the link with what's called neuroparasitology. Parasitology is the study of parasites in nature, but a parasite can go into your intestinal tract. For example, a tapeworm can parasitize your digestive system. But a neuroparasite is a parasite that actually looks to go to its host's brain, altering its circuitry to suit its interest. And so I said, aha, I had my eureka moment. So I will now would use the neuroparasitological framework to argue that human beings could not only be parasitized by actual physical brain worms, but they could also be parasitized by ideological brain worms. And so what I do in the book is I explain what some of those idea pathogens are, and then I offer a mind vaccine against this silliness.
When I was in the US in the 90s at universities, high schools, and so on, there wasn't a woke student audience. There were normal people and there were two sex genders. That's it, you know. Nobody used pronouns and so on. So when I went back a couple of years later, like at 2019, there were a couple of them. But I have the feeling in the last years it just exploded. You're a professor at the university. What's your experience? How are the students doing? And do you see that there was an explosion of more and more woke students in the last couple of years?
So that's a very good question because it actually speaks to a reality that's important to explain to people. And let me draw an analogy even before I explain it. How many people did it take to bring down the Twin Towers on 9/11? Was it 190 million terrorists? Was it 190,000 terrorists? Was it 19,000 terrorists? Oh no, it only took 19 committed zealots to alter the landscape of New York forevermore. Now, why am I saying this? It's not the case that everywhere you turn on campus, most students are woke idiots walking around. But it only takes a small but very vocal terroristic minority to then keep everybody in check. And now when you don't have checks and balances, when the professors don't say, what are you talking about? Are you an imbecile? What are you talking about? Women can have penises. When they are the ones who generate those ideas, and when then the administrators say, yeah, I also agree that it's wrong to say, it's sexist to say that there are only two biological sexes. Now you have the perfect cocktail for those dreadful ideas to spread. So no, it's not the case that when I walk into my class to profess, everybody is blue-haired. Absolutely not. Very few are. But so what? That doesn't matter, right? It's the ones who are activists that keep the rest of the people scared of their shadow.
Yeah. I experienced some crazy stories at universities with woke people, and I agree with you. It's a minority, actually. It's a really minority, but they're really radical and fanatic, dogmatic even. So, do you have some crazy stories from Wokistan?
That happened specifically to me?
Yeah, or you
many.
experienced, or you witnessed?
Oh, I mean, I could fill up. I could have a parasitic mind part 2 and part 3 and part
Let's
4.
go for it.
Yeah.
Will it be a bestseller?
So the very few have happened to me in my role as a professor at my university. Although I could think of one that happened last year. I was teaching an MBA class. So you would think that these are mature students. They are typically 28 to 32, 33. They've already been working 5-6 years. They're usually mid-level executives and so on. And so I was explaining the evolutionary roots of dark side consumption, which is something that I discuss in some of my earlier books. What's dark side consumption? Pathological gambling, pornographic addictions, eating disorders, compulsive buying, things that have a deleterious effect on the consumer. And so at one point, I'm explaining what is the biological and evolutionary explanation for these maladaptive behaviors. And so at one point, I'm talking about evolutionary explanations of anorexia nervosa. And in the process of explaining this very rigorous scientific explanation, I explain something about miscarriages that, women who experience, anyways, I won't get into the details. And so one student was very, very upset because I was describing miscarriages, and that's something that could be very triggering to people. And so I should not be this. I said, but what do you mean? I come from war. Does that mean that I should never talk about war? Should we never talk about criminality because there might be a student who has been the victim of a crime? Should we not talk about pornography because maybe there's a student who's had a brother who's had pornography, right? But he felt that it was inappropriate for me to discuss a topic like miscarriages because he has a colleague at work who had a miscarriage. So imagine if this person had gone through my childhood in Lebanon, he would have wilted away very, very quietly within the first second of my childhood. So yes, I've got many of these stories, but usually the stories from Wokistan are more in my public engagement outside of my role as in my classroom. So for example, I recently had a heated exchange with a anesthesiologist. So this is a female physician who is an anesthesiologist, right? The one who administers anesthesia in a surgery. So you would think she would be familiar with the concept of male and female. Well, she could not believe how I was beholden to antiquated notions of male and female. And then she pulled the card, well, I went to medical school, whereas you didn't, Professor. Because again, remember, it takes going to medical school to recognize that some women have 9-inch penises. So yes, I've got many of these stories. It almost sounds like satirical how insane it is.
Yeah, like you said, it's actually a virus. It's a worm in the mind of people. So what do you think? Who is behind it? When did it start? Of course, for example, 10 years ago, I didn't see any rainbow flags at buildings or at headquarters from Starbucks or Microsoft. Right now, they're everywhere. Everybody is diverse and open-minded and is ESG and pronouns and pro-gender and transsexuality. So who is behind it? Who started it? And it's like a marketing campaign, actually. Somebody had to start it and finance it. So what's your take on this?
So just before I answer your wonderful question, to link it to the original question you asked me about the Middle East, we have Queers for Palestine. And as I explained recently, I wish this were my satire, because usually I start the satire and people follow, but I can't take credit for this one. Queers for Palestine is like chickens for KFC, right? So try to think, if your identity is founded on you being part of the so-called queer community, then which of the two societies should you be defending? Very queer-friendly Tel Aviv or somewhat less friendly Gaza? Right? But that's what happens to a parasitic mind. So, but anyway, so to answer your question, I don't think that there was a conspiratorial, and so your question almost makes it sound as though, there is some, Davos guys who are, Dr. Evil. No, I think what happened, and I actually explained this in the parasitic mind. Each of these parasitic ideas, so what are they? Postmodernism, social constructivism, cultural relativism, identity politics, biophobia, fear of using biology to explain human behavior, radical feminism. Each of these idea pathogens originally started with a noble cause, but then it metamorphosizes into complete lunacy in the service of some noble justice goal. So example, equity feminism makes perfect sense. Equity feminism says, hey, there should be no differences between men and women under the law. There shouldn't be any institutionalized sexist policies. Well, most people today would say, yeah, sign me up. I'm an equity feminist. The problem then becomes when radical feminists come along and say, in order to break free out of the status quo, the patriarchal status quo, we need to argue that men and women are indistinguishable from each other. There are no innate biological differences between men and women. So in the service of a laudable and valuable social goal, it's okay if we murder and rape truth. We need to be kind and tolerant of transgender people, which most people would say, yeah, sign me up, I'm socially liberal. And in the service of that goal, we now have to argue that your genitalia doesn't define whether you're male or female. Some women have penises. Some men have a cervix. So it starts off from a noble place, And that's what I call consequentialist ethics, right? It's okay to lie and murder the truth if the consequences are noble. That's what Plato, it's known as the Platonic lie. Well, no. When it comes to matters of truth, you never violate truth in the service of a goal. So that's how, now each of them started at different points. Some of them started 80 years ago in academia. Some of them came 30, 40 years ago, some 50 years ago. But the worst of them all, the one that allows all the other ones room to proliferate, is postmodernism. Because postmodernism argues that there are no universal truths other than, of course, the one universal truth that there are no universal truths. And therefore, that allows me to say, how do we know what's male or female? How do we know who is the terrorist? How do we know what's up or down? And so on. It grants you epistemological freedom to defy your lying eyes. And so postmodernism is the granddaddy of all idea pathogens.
May you explain to our audience the postmodernism idea?
Yeah, so I'll explain it with a specific story that I've mentioned many times and I discuss in the Parasitic Mind, but it's worth repeating because maybe many of your German viewers may not know it. In 2002, one of my doctoral students had just defended his doctoral dissertation. And so we were going out to celebrate. It was myself, my wife, the student in question, and he was bringing a date, a lady. And so before we went out to dinner that night, he called me and said, oh, I just want to tell you, I want to give you a heads up that the lady that I'm bringing tonight is a graduate student in women's studies, postmodernism, and cultural anthropology. To which I answered, okay, the holy trinity of bullshit. And of course, he was telling me that because he's kind of warning me, let's have a nice evening. I said, oh, no worries. I promise I'll be on my best behavior, which of course was a complete lie, because about halfway through the evening, I very gently and very politely turned to the lady in question. I said, oh, I hear you're a postmodernist. She said, yes, I'm studying postmodernism. Actually, it was in Montreal. I won't, not that you would know who she is. I'm granting the courtesy of not telling who it is. But anyways, so I said, okay, well, I'm a scientist and I'm an evolutionary psychologist, so I think that there are universal truths. That's the basis of science. Even though, by the way, in science, everything is provisionally true, meaning that which we thought was true 300 years ago, we may revise our opinions, but we do operate under the epistemological premise that there is a truth to be discovered. Otherwise, there'd be no purpose in waking up in the morning as a scientist, as an academic. Okay. So I said, well, do you mind if I propose what I think is a universal and then you can correct me? She said, yes, go for it. Now, this is 2002, so this is way before the transgender stuff of men too can menstruate, okay? I said, is it not true within Homo sapiens, humans, that only women bear children? Is that not true? She looked at me, couldn't believe at my simpleton mind. What kind of stupid professor must I be to believe such stupidity? She said, no, that's not true. I said, it's not true that only women bear children? How so? She said, well, there is some Japanese tribe of some Japanese island whereby within their mythological folkloric realm, it is the men who bear children. So you see, by you restricting the conversation to the biological realm, that's how you can argue your nonsense. So once I recovered from that level of parasitic thinking, I said, okay, maybe it was too controversial of me to propose something as corrosive as only women can bear children. So let me propose something a bit less controversial. Yes? She said, yes, go for it. I said, is it not true since time immemorial that sailors have relied on the premise that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west? Is that not true? Now there she used a sub-variant of postmodernism. It's called deconstructivism. It's Jacques Derrida, one of the great French bullshitters. And so here the argument is that language creates reality. There is nothing outside of the language. There is no reality outside of the language that describes the reality. So there she said, well, what do you mean by east and west? And what do you mean by the sun? That which you call the sun, I might call dancing hyena. her exact words. I said, well, fine. The dancing hyena rises in the east and sets in the west. I put on dancing hyena lotion when I go to the Caribbean to the beach. And she said, I don't play those labels game. So she doesn't play the labels game of labeling something east or west, male, female, the sun. So if you have a graduate student who is going to a prestigious university with whom I'm sitting to have a conversation about whether only women bear children and whether the sun really exists and rises in the east and the west, that explains perfectly to you what postmodernism is.
Yeah, perfect. I recently talked to Konstantin Kissin, perhaps you know him, and I asked him if we have seen peak wokeness. What's your take on this? Do you think we just saw the peak and now we see it, I don't know, disappear?
You know, I oscillate on that question. My optimistic self wants to answer, yes, it's good times ahead, but yet every single email that I receive from university is some woke thing. Let's honor indigenous ways of knowing. Let's not place the scientific method ahead. Let's have land acknowledgements because we're sitting on stolen land. We now have a dean of the Black experience. What does it mean, the dean of the Black experience? What about the dean of the Jewish experience? What about the dean of the Lebanese Jewish experience? What about the dean of the German immigrant experience? What academia does, what the scientific method does, is it liberates us from the shackles of our personal identity. That's what makes it beautiful, right? There is no Lebanese Jewish way of doing mathematics. There's just mathematics. There is no Lebanese Jewish way of studying psychology. There's just psychology. But yet, under the guise of super progressivism, we now have the dean of the indigenous experience, the dean of indigenous ways of knowing. So I'd like to think that we are done with it, but I think it's going to take a generation of two of severe culture wars before we can truly turn the tide around.
All right. Oh my God. I hope you're wrong. But do you think it's a sign actually that the society in general is like decadent and kind of hubris, like in the late cycle of the Roman Empire?
Absolutely, right? Because think about it. People who are ducking bombs and who are... Let me give you an example from this is actually a story that I tell in the Happiness book, when I talk about the importance of play. And I remember my parents, in the middle of the Civil War, the need to play is so important that they would tell me, okay, go outside and play during, let's say, a ceasefire. Go outside and play a bit, but make sure not to cross a particular line, because then that opens you up to the snipers who will blow your brain. Right? So when you are making sure that the soccer ball doesn't pass this line because otherwise my brain will be blown, I probably don't have too much time to worry about misgendering your pronouns. But when I live in orgiastic plentitude, then I can argue that you misgendering me becomes a form of linguistic genocide.
Talking about soccer, I heard you nearly became a professional soccer player. Is it true?
Indeed, it is very true. As a matter of fact, if you go and watch some of my clips where I show some of my skills, even as someone who's in his 50s, I can say this with all due modesty, there aren't many players on the German national team that have those kinds of skills. Certainly not Thomas Müller, although he's a
okay, he's your favorite one. Okay.
No, he is a beautifully intelligent player, but in terms of his aesthetic qualities, he's not the most skillful player. So yes, I was going to become a professional player. And then, as I explained in the Happiness book, when I talk about regrets and so on, I had a very, very nasty injury, and then later another injury. Plus, there were other obstacles that did not allow me to, had I grown up in Barcelona or in Paris, had we left there instead of Montreal, maybe now I would have not only been an academic, but a professional soccer player. Yes.
Yeah. Next life, perhaps, who knows?
From your lips to God's ear.
Yeah, and I hope you're born in Germany, so we play in the World Championship again and win it. So, last question about your about the Parasitic Mind book.
Sure.
How woke is Canada actually?
Canada is, so if we put it on a woke continuum, it's right up, with what's say, I mean, Sweden is woke on some dimensions, less so on others, but it is certainly more woke than, say, the United States. Usually, the saying goes, when the United States sneezes, Canada catches a cold. But in this case, it's the opposite. We are the leaders of wokeness. Now, it's not because there is something in the Canadian water that makes us more woke. It's because we have a prime minister for the past 8 years who is the walking manifestation of every single parasitic idea that I discuss in the parasitic mind. And so that's the reason why we are so woke.
Yeah, I hope Pierre will win and Trudeau will be gone one day, because I can't stand him, to be honest. But this is my personal opinion. I think he's the wokest politician I know so far. Anyhow, let's talk about your latest book, Happiness.
Sure.
Let's talk about something positive. And it's called 8 Secrets for Leading the Good Life. So tell us, please, the secrets. Of course, the audience should read it, but tell us some of them, please.
Just in case someone's searching, that's the subtitle. It's The Sad, SAAD, The Sad Truth About Happiness, 8 Secrets for Leading the Good Life. So maybe I can begin by telling you very briefly why I decided to write this book, because, coming off the parasitic mind, if you would have asked me, what's your next book project going to be on? I would have never told you, I think the next one's going to be about happiness. And so what led me to write this book is really two key factors. Number one, I would receive many emails from people saying, how is it that you can remain so happy and optimistic and you're always joking around, you have this big sense of humor, even when you're dealing with very serious topics? What is your secret, Professor? So that would be one. Secondly, I noticed that whenever I would post something where I'm offering some grand advice, usually I don't do that because I'm a descriptive psychologist, right? I'm trying to describe and understand behavior. I'm not a self-help guy. I'm not a clinical psychologist. But whenever I would share some advice about how to live life, then people would start writing to me saying, oh my God, you don't know how much this helped me. And so that kind of made me think, well, if people want to know what's my secret to happiness, and if they really trust my opinions and my advice, why don't I take a crack at putting that in a book? Now, it was a bit of a daunting exercise to do because probably of all topics that philosophers have ever written about, none has been as frequent as to write about what is the good life, how to live a good life. And so, I was worried, am I going to be able to come up with something unique, something fresh? And I'd like to think I have. And the way that I've done that is by having my personal anecdotes, my personal trajectory of happiness, backed up by the ancient wisdoms and coupled with the contemporary science on happiness and well-being. I put those together and hopefully I've come up with a good book. And I can tell you about what some of those secrets are if you'd like.
Yes, please do so. But before you say that, I will tell you my secret about a happy life.
Please.
It's called Happy Wife, Happy Life. It's my experience.
You already covered one of my chapters then. So early in the book, I talk about the two decisions that you'll make that will either impart great misery or great happiness to you. And by the way, I should mention, unlike people who usually navigate in the self-help market, I don't presume that I can offer you the definitive recipe. Rather, what I'm arguing is a statistical argument, right? So in the same way that when we tell someone, look, if you want to reduce your chances of lung cancer, don't smoke. That doesn't mean that if you're a non-smoker, you're not potentially going to get lung cancer, but you certainly are going to reduce it greatly. So each of my secrets and prescriptions is a statistical argument that increases your chances of getting to the top of Mount Happiness. Okay, so what are the two decisions? Number one, choosing the right spouse, to your point. And number two, choosing the right profession. And so what are some of the key ways by which we can try to do that? So let's do the spouse first. So in evolutionary psychology, we have two opposing maxims. We have the opposites attract maxim and the birds of a feather flock together maxim. So which is the better one in terms of increasing your chances at happiness in a marriage? Well, the research shows overwhelmingly that if you're talking about long-term relationships, it's birds of a feather flock together.
Yes.
Now, the question is flocking on which feathers? And here, what we're talking about, similar values, similar belief systems, similar grand life mindsets. You know, if I am someone very much rooted in my faith, and every decision I make is based on whether it is consistent with my faith or not, and my prospective spouse is a outspoken atheist, well, it doesn't take a fancy professor to say, well, statistically speaking, you're not putting the odds in your favor. You could still overcome it, but statistically, it's not going to probably work out. And so having someone with whom you are assorting on some of these foundational values is a key one. Okay, because your physical attraction to the person is not going to carry you 20 and 30 years into the relationship. But if it's someone whose friendship you appreciate, if it's someone that when you wake up in the morning and you look at the person next to you and say, oh my God, I'm so happy to be waking up next to this person, well, then you're well on your way to being happy. Now, if after you leave this person in the morning, you go off to a job that makes you experience a sense of existential glee, that makes you filled with purpose and meaning, well, now you've completely cracked the secret to life, because you wake up next to someone happy, you go away to somewhere that makes you happy, you return home to that person that's happy, well, things are going to work out for you. Now, what are the two key criteria that I think can augment your chances for occupational happiness? Number one, I argue that all other things equal, something that allows you to instantiate your creative impulse will grant you purpose and meaning. So I could be a chef, I could be an architect, I could be a podcaster, I could be a stand-up comic, I could be a professor, an author. Each of these people is pursuing a completely different profession. But what they share in common is that they are immersing themselves in the mystical process of creating. That process of creating is truly a liberating process that gives us purpose and meaning. That's why artists are revered, right? Because that artist is creating something on that canvas that will give me a great sense of aesthetic, hedonic pleasure, okay? So if you can find a job that allows you to be creative, you're well on your way. The second thing I would argue is that a job that grants me temporal freedom is one that's going to make me happy. What does that mean? I work very, very long hours. I'm always working. I'm a workaholic, but I don't suffer from what I call scheduling asphyxia usually, meaning that my day is not determined by the schedule of someone else. So now I can have this conversation on a German show, then I can go off to the cafe and start thinking about what the possible topics for my next book might be. Then I might have a meeting with a graduate student whose doctoral dissertation I'm supervising. So I am floating around, always immersed in creativity and cerebral pursuits. Well, that makes me happy. Now, you might say, okay, well, that's great. But what about the person who has life constraints? They have to put food on the table and they have to be a bus driver. Well, any job that is dignified and honest is fine. But here's what you can do in that case. I'm going to give you two examples of two bus drivers, one of which is following my prescriptions, one of which is not. I was returning once on a bus ride from back to, this was when I was a PhD student at Cornell. So this was in New York State. It was about a 2.5, 3 hour bus ride. And I started chatting with the bus driver. And at the end of when we got to Ithaca, New York, a lady came up to me and said, I just want to thank you. I said, she didn't even talk to me. I said, well, thank me for what? She said, well, I couldn't help but hearing the wonderful, intimate, beautiful conversation that you and the bus driver were having. And I thought it was such a beautiful moment. Well, that bus driver was creating something. He created a space where two strangers could bond through communion, through bonding, through chatting. Now, another bus driver could view his job as nothing more but transporting people from position A to B. One person is still creating, the other one is not. And here's another small point I'll make, and then I'll cede the floor back to you. Let's suppose you have no chance of instantiating your creative impulse? How about when you finish your job, instead of going home and sitting passively for 4 hours watching nonsensical TV, you decide, you know what, you've always wanted to try out glass blowing as an art form. Why don't you go sign up at the local high school that has an adult learning center and sign up for that glass blowing and maybe create some nice art? So the process of creating, the process of vagabonding through various meaningful pursuits, if you can find a way to incorporate that within your job, you win.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's my experience as well. And I'm not that wise like you are. But yeah, get out, do something, look what your passion is, follow your passion, follow your heart. And some people believe, for example, in destiny. Some people don't. So what do you think? Do you believe in destiny or in karma, for example? You think anything that happens comes for a reason?
Right. Well, great question. I don't believe in destiny as kind of a supernatural thing. It's inscribed in the sky. And I'll tell you why. Actually, your question has a very serious scientific implication. Destiny is not within the realm of what Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, would argue is within the realm of science. Why? Because it fails what's called the falsification principle. There is no way that you can falsify the principle of destiny. Why? Let's think of a thought experiment. Let's suppose I want to test whether destiny is real or not. So I'm going to go out of my house and I'm going to cross the street. There are two things that could happen when I cross the street. Either a bus will hit me and I die, or a bus doesn't hit me and I make it through to the other side. There's only two possible cases, right? Those cover all possibilities in terms of a bus coming through. Well, if the bus hits me and I die, that is proof that was my destiny. If the bus doesn't hit me and I don't die, that was my destiny, and that's proof that was my destiny. So there are no states of events in the world that falsify the principle of destiny, because that which is must have been my destiny. Therefore, it's pure, utter bullshit. On the other hand, if you tell me, do I believe in a earthly sense of karma, then yes. So for example, if I do good in the world, if I do meaningful things, people out there are going to be paying attention, and nice things will befall me because I lived an honorable and dignified and meaningful life. So in that sense, it was karma, but it's not karma in a booga booga sense. It's karma in a real materialistic sense. And by the way, that's often happened to me, where out of the blue, I get a call or an email from some unbelievably high profile person who says, I just want to tell you, I'm paying attention. I love your stuff. I'm a huge fan. And then there'll be some wonderful reward at the end of that. And I'm sitting there thinking, my God, I never even knew that this person knew that I existed. And yet here we are. So yes, there is a sense of karma, but in a very earthly manner.
Mm-hmm. And I also think if you do good things, it feels good for myself. I feel good because I know I did something good. So I go to bed and I feel happy. That's also good.
Absolutely.
And like you said, there's also the saying in Germany, like you scream into the woods, it comes back with the echo. It's give and take. So
Exactly.
definitely. So I think the small things make you happy as well. Some people are happy or feel happiness when they drink a good cup of coffee, or when they look in the garden, or when they see playing
Absolutely.
cats together, or something like that. And we should appreciate the little things in life, like talking to somebody very smart right now. So I'm really, really privileged, actually, talking to you and having this opportunity to bring it to people in Germany, that they can know you, that they say, oh, I want to read his book, or I want to see what this guy is doing. So this is a crazy and a very privileged life we live all together, actually, and we should use it, because instead of watching 4 hours, binge watching YouTube or Netflix, you can read a good book or listen to this conversation and share it with friends, and that's what it is, actually, what I think. Have you ever been to Germany?
I have several times. So the first time that I went was in 1990. Actually, I was in Munich, and I was with a German guy who had done his MBA with me, who had said to me, you should you should try out in the Bundesliga. But I was already at that point, 25 years old. I won't mention his name, but he's a German guy. Then this next time I was in Germany, I might be missing one or two visits, but some of the ones that I remember was in 2001. I visited the Max Planck Institute in Berlin. I had been invited by Gerd Gigerenzer's team. He's a famous German psychologist and an evolutionist. And so I had spent a week giving several talks in Berlin.
Cool.
And then the next time was in 2013. I was invited to a summit also organized by the Max Planck Institute on evolutionary economics. And so I've been a few times to Germany, yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, let's talk about your passion. You're a professor for marketing psychology in marketing and consumer behavior. It sounds for me like manipulation and propaganda, actually. Are we manipulated right now, actually, with all the news we got, with propaganda, with the telly, with social media, Twitter, Instagram,
Right.
TikTok, even with Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, and so on? What do you
Sure.
think? What's your take on this?
Yeah, so look, marketing. So I study, consumer psychology, evolutionary psychology, and
Yeah.
psychology of decision making, and hence that's why I'm in a marketing department, because I apply it in consumer behavior and economic decision making. But there's nothing uniquely nefarious or diabolical about the marketing process, because marketing seeks to persuade people. That persuasion could be nefarious, could be negative, it could be propaganda, but it could also be a public policy campaign to get people to stop smoking. It could also be a policy campaign to get people to stop leading sedentary life and exercise. So this idea that, advertisers and marketers are these diabolically, manipulative people who are always trying to get you to do the wrong things. I mean, of course, there is an element to that. Oftentimes, advertisers are trying to get us to do things that are certainly not healthy for us. Hey, eat some more chips and gain some more weight. But that's not the official role of marketing. Marketing is the application of psychological mechanisms to persuade people. That persuasion could be for good causes, it could be for bad causes.
Okay, and if you watch the news, for example, about the war in the Ukraine or somewhere else, you think do you see patterns of manipulation and propaganda sometimes?
So here, the way that I would answer this is that human beings are cognitive misers. Cognitive misers means that most people are too cognitively lazy to expend the effort that's necessary to make a decision, right? They want shortcuts. So if Barack Obama, peace be upon him, tells me that Islam is a religion of peace, then that means it must be true because George Bush said it, and because Barack Obama said it, and because Justin Trudeau said it. I'll just believe it, right? Now, of course, I could say, well, let me see if I could find the evidence that either supports that position or not. But you know what? That's too effortful. It takes me too much time. I'm lazy. I just want to sit and watch mindless TV and eat chips and grow fat. And therefore, if he says so, it must be true. So I think the problem is that you could only be propagandized if you don't have the inoculation against these persuasive intents, right? That's one of the reasons, by the way, you're not supposed to, whether it be ethically, morally, or legally, to target children with advertising, because children below a certain age are unable to build up a counter argument to your persuasive intent. They don't know that the advertiser is trying to manipulate you, and therefore their minds don't have the defenses. But the problem is that most people have the intellectual abilities of most children. That's why we can fill them with bullshit all day long, because they are mindless in the manner by which they navigate through all of these important decisions. I'll give you a quick example, if I may, going back to the parasitic mind. And here I'm going to use, this is a memory stick, okay?
Yeah.
But I'm going to use this as if it is the wine, the cork of a wine bottle. You know, the cork that we take out from the wine bottle? There's an expression in Arabic that says, getting drunk simply by smelling the cork of the wine bottle. What does that mean? It basically means that I am of such weak constituency that I don't need to drink the entire wine bottle to get drunk. I just have to smell the cork and I'm already drunk. Now, how do we apply this to this story of propaganda and so on? Well, most people do this. Who am I going to vote for in the next presidential or prime minister election? Watch, I'm going to get drunk now. See, look at me. I'm getting drunk by Justin Trudeau. He's tall. Look at this. You ready? Look, he's got beautiful hair. He's young. Wow, my God, I'm getting drunk. I'm going to vote for Justin Trudeau. I don't have to worry about the hard work of looking at what his policies are. I just got drunk by smelling the cork of Justin Trudeau. Now, let me do Donald Trump. He's disgusting. He's an ogre. He is vulgar, right? I didn't say I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump because of his fiscal policy, his immigration policy, his tax policy. That would take too much effort. It's much better to simply get drunk by the cork of the wine bottle. So the reason why people are easily manipulated is because they are lobotomized. But if they would spend the time to actually think, then it might be a bit harder to manipulate them.
Yeah, very good answer, actually. So the last two questions, Gad, is when was the last time you were happy, actually? And what was it? What made you happy?
Oh, what a lovely question. Earlier today, I was sitting at the cafe facing all kinds of Jew hatred, which is beautiful and so liberating. 45 years after leaving Lebanon, to sit there and be told of what we're going to do to you, Jew, and so on. And so I was frustrated. I had just been invited to go on a very high profile show after your show, which it's going to be rescheduled. So I was frustrated and so on. And then I receive a text from my daughter. How is your day going so far, Daddy? And I replied, I said, well, there's a lot of stress, but I have you as a daughter, so all is good. That made me happy. Now that speaks to your earlier point, which is maintain context, man. Life is not all about Donald Trump and the Palestine and Israelis. Life is magical. The chances of you being born, let me break it down to you. Women are born with about 1 to 2 million eggs, ova. Of those, about 400 ova will be fertilizable from the onset of menarche, which is when a girl has her first menses, up to menopause, about 400. In a single ejaculation of a man, the average number of spermatozoa is 250 million. So think about the chances that Mark and Gad, statistically speaking, are sitting here having this conversation.
Magic. Yes.
So in the grand scheme, I mean, I'm sorry to say, but that is a astonishingly profound point to make, right? So if you recognize how magisterial the miracle of life is, maybe you could see the humanity in other people, stop wasting your life on endless hatred and do meaningful things. Right? There are lovely Palestinians and there are mean Palestinians. There are lovely Jews, there are mean Jews. Why don't you elevate yourself, look for universal principles that unite us, and then maybe we could all be happy.
Yeah, that's the goal, actually. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing you said, because I think the same. We have to crash down the borders we have in our heads with borders of countries, borders of sexuality, religion, and so on. And we're just one species, we're all the same, actually, the same flesh and blood and everything. And I just think it's stupid because we are flying to the moon, we have iPhones, we can talk over the internet thousands of kilometers, but then still we are killing each other because of stupid things, because of old men somewhere. And this is just horrible. So yeah, I can agree 100%, Gad. Last question, and this is a question I ask everybody in my show. Sure. And you already answered it actually somehow, but I will do it anyway. So what is the meaning of life for Gad Saad?
You know, several ways. One of the things I would say is, well, of course, to be happy, but happiness is not the ultimate goal. Rather, if I have made good decisions, if I have adopted good mindsets, then happiness will be the outcome of that. So let me revise my question, my answer. It's to live a dignified, honorable life. You know, this is going to sound cliche-ish, but it really isn't. I taught my children whenever we go on the beach. Now, it could be a bit because I have a bit of OCD, I have a bit of perfectionism. When I walk on the beach, we go often to Southern California where we used to live, and I see any kind of litter on the beach. I've taught my children, well, why don't we at least pick up a bit of litter so that we know when we leave the beach that no matter what happens, we left the beach cleaner than when we got there. And boy, does that feel existentially good. And so I think what makes me happy in an existential, metaphysical sense is to be a good person, whatever that means, to be a good husband, to be an honorable father, to be an honest academic, to be fun and playful. If I can do all those things, then I could put my head on the pillow at the end of the day and I say, you know what? I'm living an authentic life. I can go to sleep now.
Yeah. Yeah, you do a great job. Keep on doing it. Keep up the good work, of course. And it was a pleasure talking to you, Gad. I hope we can talk again to each other with your next book or whenever you have time for us. It was great talking to you. And I will put all the books and details about you, where can people find you and so on, in the show notes. Check it out, please. It's definitely worth giving it a shot. Read the books. I had so much fun and so much food thought after reading your books. So thank you very much for your work, and it was great having you.
Thank you so much. You know, oftentimes when I receive an invitation, I don't know what to make of the invitation. Should I accept it? Should I not? This is one of those examples where I'm walking away saying, boy, am I glad I accepted your invitation. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it a lot. It means a world to me. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. And yeah, hope to talk to you soon again. And thank you for your work. And yeah, stay stable, have fun. Thank you very much.
Cheers.